She said nothing. That was the most devastating part. While the tabloids screamed and the internet dissected every lyric he changed on that concert stage, while fans took sides and entertainment journalists filed breathless dispatches about the end of Hollywood's most admired love story, Nicole Kidman stood in front of the cameras at a film festival, ringless, composed, and absolutely silent. No statement, no tears, no retaliation, just those eyes. And if you looked closely, you could see it. Not grief, exactly. Something harder than grief. Something that looked like a woman who had finally, after nearly 2 decades, decided to stop protecting a man who could not protect himself. What she did next, what she revealed not with words, but with actions, with choices, with the quiet and devastating precision of someone who had been waiting a very long time, changed everything the world thought it knew about their marriage. And you need to understand something before this story goes any further. The version the public believed in for 19 years was never the whole truth. Not even close. Nicole Mary Kidman was not born into glamour. She arrived in Honolulu in 1967 to Australian parents temporarily abroad, a psychologist father, a nurse and educator mother, and was raised in Sydney in a household that prized discipline and intellectual ambition above almost everything else. The girl who would one day hold an Oscar, command $40 million a picture, and be called the greatest actress of her generation was, as a child, almost pathologically shy. She blushed so violently when called upon in class that teachers pulled her parents aside to express concern. Yet inside that fragile exterior lived something ferocious and hungry. She found ballet first, then drama classes, then youth theater, spaces where the emotions she could not speak in ordinary life could finally breathe and expand and take on shape. By her teens, Australia's film industry was blossoming, and she stepped into it with that rare and unsettling combination of porcelain delicacy and iron determination. What directors noticed almost immediately was not just her features. It was the feeling she put behind her eyes, the sense that somewhere behind the beauty there was a woman who had already survived something and come out the other side sharper for it. Hollywood came calling in the late 1980s, and with it came Tom Cruise. Their marriage in 1990 made them the most photographed couple on Earth. It also, by most accounts, cost her enormously. The years with Tom brought prestige and pain in equal measure. Scientology cast its long shadow over the marriage, over her relationships, over her sense of her own reality. When the union ended in 2001, she lost not just a husband but primary custody of their 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor. Friends described her afterward as a woman hollowed out, not broken, never broken, but carved open in a way that would never fully close. She had wanted a family more than she had wanted fame. She had wanted to be a mother, in the daily, ordinary, irreplaceable sense of that word, and that dream had been taken from her by forces she spent years trying to understand. It is not a coincidence, not even a little, that when Keith Urban appeared in her life 4 years later, she moved toward him with the urgency of someone who had been too long in the cold and had finally, unexpectedly, found warmth. But what you haven't heard yet is what she actually saw in him, and why that vision would become both her greatest act of love and the very thing that slowly dismantled them both. Keith Lionel Urban was born the same year as Nicole, across the Tasman Sea in Whangarei, New Zealand, before his family settled in Queensland, Australia. His father owned a convenience store and loved country music. Not exactly a conventional foundation, but it handed young Keith the one thing that would define his entire existence: a guitar at age 6. Country music, with its unguarded language of heartbreak and hard-won redemption, gave him both an identity and an escape hatch, because there was something at home he needed to escape from. Insiders described a household marked by financial strain and emotional instability, a childhood that made him simultaneously desperate for stability and constitutionally incapable of staying still. The music was never just a passion. It was a survival strategy dressed up as a dream. By his teens, he was performing in bars and talent shows, cultivating the image of the brooding outsider with the rock star's restlessness and a country boy's emotional openness. He dropped out of school entirely. For Keith Urban, there was never a plan B. There was only the stage, or there was nothing at all. The talent was unmistakable. The demons were just as real and just as large. By his 20s, he was battling alcohol and substances with the same ferocious intensity he brought to his guitar. He arrived in Nashville in the early 1990s, hungry and volatile, and after years of grinding on the circuit and sleeping on couches and playing to half-empty rooms, his 1999 self-titled American debut finally broke through. Suddenly, he was country music's new heartthrob. Tousled hair, a voice that dripped with longing and loss, fingers that could make a guitar say the things a man couldn't say out loud. And underneath all of it, behind all the platinum records and sold-out tours, a man who remained, in his most private self, genuinely terrified that he would eventually sabotage everything he had fought to build. By the time Nicole entered his life, he had already been in and out of rehab. The fear of his own self-destruction was his most faithful companion, always there in the quiet moments between shows. When they collided at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles in January 2005, what the world was handed was a story of destiny. Two Australians, born the same year, both global stars, both carrying the visible and invisible weight of hard lives. What the world was not shown, what no glossy magazine cover or red carpet photograph could ever quite capture, was the particular and complicated architecture of their need for each other. She needed to rebuild the family she had lost. He needed someone whose steadiness might finally anchor him to himself. She was drawn to his vulnerability in the way that strong people are sometimes drawn to fragile things. He was transfixed by her composure in the way that restless people are drawn to solid ground. And both of them, in ways neither perhaps fully admitted even to themselves, were walking toward each other not purely out of love, but out of something that runs deeper and darker and more urgent than love, something closer to the need for mutual rescue. He didn't call her for months after that first meeting. She later admitted his silence almost ended the story before it could begin. When he finally reached out, something locked into place between them with the certainty of a key turning in a lock. By June 2006, barely a year after they began dating, they were married in a lavish ceremony at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. She wore a Balenciaga gown with a dramatic veil that seemed almost designed to make the moment feel cinematic and permanent. He wore his trademark long hair and looked every bit the romantic troubadour the world had always imagined him to be. She reportedly walked into the church by candlelight, tears barely held in check, while he serenaded her during the reception with a voice that made even the most cynical guests look away and compose themselves. For fans across the world, it was exactly the ending they had been waiting to see. The reformed bad boy, the luminous woman who had believed in him when he'd barely believed in himself. For months later, the real story began. Just weeks after the thank you notes from the wedding had been sent, Keith checked himself into rehab for alcohol abuse. The tabloids called it a time bomb. Nicole called it loyalty. She stood by him without a moment's visible hesitation, visiting, protecting, refusing to allow the press the satisfaction of seeing her falter or retreat. In later interviews, he credited her with saving his life during that dark stretch. What insiders observed was something more layered and more troubling than a love story. She had been powerless to save her marriage to Tom Cruise. Now, with Keith, she poured herself into the role of healer with an intensity that was equal parts genuine love and unresolved grief. She believed in second chances because she needed second chances to mean something, needed them to be real, to be worth the cost. That belief would define their marriage for the next 19 years. It would hold them together through the seasons when the world called them a miracle. And it would, slowly and quietly, and without any single dramatic rupture, grind them both into a version of themselves they hadn't chosen. They spent the years that followed building one of Hollywood's most convincing and meticulously maintained facades. She balanced blockbusters with serious artistic work, earning the respect of directors and critics alike. He became a Grammy-winning pillar of American country music, touring relentlessly, giving everything to the stage night after night. Together, they shaped the public narrative of resilience. Two damaged people who had found in each other the thing the entertainment industry insisted could not survive fame and distance and addiction. Lasting, genuine love. At award shows he thanked her with tears spilling openly down his face. She described him in interviews as the person who had brought her back to life. Their daughters, Sunday Rose born in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010, completed the image of the family she had spent her adult life trying to find her way back to. And still, beneath every polished appearance and every careful interview, the cracks were quietly deepening. His battle with sobriety was a current that never fully went still. Her need for stability had, across the years, hardened into something he sometimes experienced not as love, but as surveillance. He wanted to be her equal, not her ongoing project. She had given so much of herself to keeping him steady that she had slowly, incrementally, lost track of what she herself needed. Friends close to the couple described their dynamic in later years as one of perpetual and exhausting negotiation, his freedom against her need for security, his passion against her need for peace, his restlessness against her hunger for solid ground. The public performance of the perfect marriage had become something they maintained less for the world and more for themselves, as though if they could sustain the story convincingly enough and long enough, they could make it permanently true. By the early 2020s, the whispers had built into something impossible to fully quiet. Solo appearances, missing wedding rings, caught by paparazzi lenses, carefully worded non-answers in interviews where there had once been warmth and ease. She agonized over the decision for months before she made it. That much was clear to everyone who loved her. She was, above everything and always, a mother first, still carrying the wound from losing daily life with Isabella and Connor, and determined to do whatever was necessary to shield Sunday and Faith from the spectacle of a public collapse. But as someone close to her framed it with devastating simplicity, she realized she could no longer save both the marriage and herself. In late September 2025, she filed in Davidson County, Tennessee, citing irreconcilable differences. The language of the filing was brief and deliberately restrained. The weight behind those two words was staggering. His response, by contrast, was not restrained. Within days he appeared on stage in Pennsylvania, ringless, and delivered what could only be described as a public unburdening. He altered lyrics in his breakup anthem, sharpening them into something pointed and raw that the audience understood immediately. He dropped from his set list the song many believed had been written with her in mind, a quiet erasure that said more than any statement could. He held up photographs of his daughter's mid-performance, a gesture that lived somewhere between love and grievance, between tenderness and accusation. And Nicole, across the country, appeared at a film festival in silence, composed, ringless, and utterly unshaken by the spectacle of it. That silence was exposure, not a leaked conversation, not a tell-all interview, not a legal document spelling out grievances in precise and punishing detail. Her silence, her stillness, her absolute refusal to match his public chaos with chaos of her own. That was Nicole Kidman completely and finally revealing the truth of their 19 years together. She was the one who had done the work. She was the one who had carried the weight. Year after year, performance after performance, crisis after crisis. And she was the one, in the end, who found the courage to put it down and walk away clean. What their story ultimately reveals reaches past celebrity gossip and past the comfortable distance of other people's drama. It touches something most of us have lived in some quieter, less photographed version of our own lives, the particular danger of loving someone not just for who they are, but for who you need them to be. She needed Keith Urban to be the proof that love could undo loss. He needed Nicole Kidman to be the ground he had never had beneath him. For 19 years they tried, with genuine effort and genuine feeling, to be those things for each other. In trying, they gave each other something real and irreplaceable, 2 daughters, 1,000 moments of tenderness that no one outside the marriage could measure, a love that was never, not entirely, a performance. But you cannot build a permanent life on what someone needs you to be. The weight of that, in the end, becomes the very thing that breaks what it was meant to hold. The woman who walked quietly away from that marriage was not the woman who had walked into a chapel in Sydney by candlelight with tears on the edge of her eyes and a whole rebuilt future in front of her. She had spent 19 years becoming someone she could no longer afford to put aside for anyone. And that slow, costly, necessary arrival at herself is not a tragedy. It is the hardest thing a person can do. And she did it without a single word,